to episode 18. This is Ruben.
And this is Aaron.
Let's talk about movement today, guys. This is one thing within the exercise field that the last few years is changing, and that's what we like to see.
Good change.
Back in the days, the way people train, it was training muscles.
Yeah, it was very bodybuilding oriented.
It was a bodybuilder oriented training where you emphasize either bicep or triceps or chest. By the way, people, this is Tuna, it's my cat, and she loves to drink out of other people's cups. So if you put a cup around, she comes in and she drinks it.
I didn't know she liked vodka.
I didn't know you drink vodka in the morning.
It comes in plastic bottles now.
So ultimately, people used to train muscle groups. So exercise programs will be like, let's do back and chest, let's do legs and tricep, shoulder and traps, things like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Ultimately, traps,
legs and abs, or whatever, you know, whatever the breakdown was.
Yes. Whatever that people like.
Right.
So let's talk about what changed so far. What do you think changed so far, or it's important to start changing more and more?
Well, it's changing more and more, and eventually it will do even so. But I think that the greatest, shift it was that people began to understand that they need to train movements. That particular methodology of training of doing isolated muscles does not work well for the athlete. And what came about and where the transition made its change was actually what happened with functional training. Everybody started talking about functional training, function this, function that. Well, what they actually figured out is that you need to train the patterns and the movements that are equate to that specific of your sport or your game, whatever it is that you're doing, right? And that's why we have people now focusing, their training into movements, right, and not into isolated, muscles.
Exactly.
Because ultimately what was happening is that the brain and the muscle, they create a very strange connection, and then you start moving more like a robot and less like a human being. And everything becomes like very kind of forced, and the body is not well synchronized. And when you want to make jumping for a rebound, your body's not going to be well coordinated enough, because while you were training the muscles, you were teaching the muscle just to do one movement, like an elbow flexion, like a bicep curl, or like a tricep extension, elbow extension, or whatever the movement was, and it was not put together in a context as a movement. It was all isolated, specific joint movements. And right there, people begin to lose function. And not to bash anybody, but if you ever see, professional bodybuilders moving, I think that's the last person that you want to emulate. They move awkward. Sometimes it's because the muscle mass that they have, which is excessive, and sometimes it's because the body is not well synced. So you'll never see these guys like doing any major sport activity. However, you got other guys, like for example the wrestlers, which I always have admired. These guys are humongous. Tall, big, really muscular, really, really heavy, and some of the stunts that they pull is amazing. How they can jump and the hits that they can take and how they can flip and stuff. But you'll see that those guys train a lot of time in movement and not so much in isolated, muscle patterns.
So one of the questions I perceive is going to be happening, and people will be asking, is like, how come I see professional athletes doing a bodybuilder style workout, yet they still good athletes?
Yep.
So ultimately, I think it's because it is despite their training program.
Absolutely.
So they probably would be even a whole lot better if they would have participated in more functional training.
Right, and not only would they be better in the sense that they will suffer less chances of actually getting injured.
That too.
And obviously, I always have made this analogy that athletes are created and made in a sense. You have to create them in a way, but you also have to be born with a certain genetic gift. Fine. Aside from that, an athlete and a regular person, as I mentioned before in another episode, I don't know which one it was, the difference between the two is that the athlete usually recuperates really, really well, have that inherent ability to actually overcome physical challenge quickly. Where a layperson like us, for example, would take a lot longer to recover. And in that time that you spend recovering, that extra time that you spend recovering, these guys are already recovered and learning new engrams, developing new motor engrams and actually getting better at the sport. So they always will be one step ahead of us. Now, if we get injured, we get set back way behind us, and that guy will always be like a huge challenge for us to overcome in that sense.
Okay. So what kind of movements are important? Yeah. Our teacher Paul C.H.E.K, he basically had created a system. He calls it primal movement patterns.
Right.
And those are the movements that were important for our survival back in the days.
Right.
So without each of the movement functioning properly, you had a very low chance of survival. Yeah?
If you couldn't perform any of that.
If you could not perform any of the movements, you probably would not survive, or you had a challenge of surviving.
And also, in addition to that, to those primal, as far as, going back to the origins of human beings, is also that any activity, any sport that you can think of, can actually be made of any or all of these patterns put together. It could be one, or it could be several of them put together. And that's what makes sense at the time of training movement, and not doing isolated, muscle groups.
Okay.
Or muscle, muscle.
So the patterns that we have, it's important to train. Number one is the squatting pattern.
That's right.
The squatting is, think of it, you going in the woods, and you gotta do number two.
Okay.
That's a squat.
Right.
Ultimately, if you couldn't squat back in the days, you couldn't poop. If you can't poop, you don't survive.
No, you don't. But just think of it from this position. Every time that you're taking a seat and you're sitting down, you're performing a variation or a form of a squat.
So when you sit in the couch, when you get in the car, all those things are basically squat pattern.
Right.
The second one will be a lunge. Yeah.
A lunge. Well, if you wanna, for those of you that might never done lunges, think about walking up a very steep hill. That kind of climbing that you do, that's a lunge, except that you will do it on a flat surface.
Or a pattern when you put your one leg forward and you want to tie your shoe.
Okay.
Something like that.
Right.
That's kind of like a lunge pattern. So one leg goes in front of you.
Right.
Any kind of pulling movement. So anything that you pull in any direction is an important moving pattern.
Right. So we already have a squat, lunge,
pull. Then we have push. Everything that it has to do with pushing.
Right.
Away from you.
Pulling away.
That's a pushing. Then we have twisting. So anything rotational.
Right.
And anything, another one is bending. So anything that you have to do with bending down to pick things up and bring it back up.
Yeah.
And gait is the last one.
Gait, which means walking.
Gait is basically walking.
Trotting and sprinting. All three forms.
So ultimately those are 7 primal pattern movements. And it's important to start using either one of them or 2 of them or 3 of them per workout.
Yes. So you can say, for example, Monday I'm gonna do pushing exercises. You can break it down even further. It says, upper body or lower body pushing.
Exactly.
Then another day you can do pulling. It could be upper body or lower body. Another day you can put more emphasis on just twisting and bending. So you can think of a myriad of exercises that you can do that require these specific patterns. Sometimes you'll notice that some of the exercises you're doing, they're actually like a mixture of several things. You could be pushing and bending, and you could be pulling and going into a twist pattern or a bending pattern. So there's many different ways, but it's not to get caught in the paradigm that everything has to be like you read on typical manuals, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger bodybuilding guide. That's for a bodybuilder. How that training will, that type of training methodology will help an athlete is not really clear. It can make it more muscular. If he needs to add weight, it will be good. But as far as really fine-tuning the nervous system and how the nervous system has to apply on the muscles for the muscles to function, it will not have much or any carryover whatsoever or significant enough to improve the quality of that athlete.
So ultimately, start thinking also within the movement. Start designing programs as much as you can. Design programs. As we're going to go along, you'll have a better time understanding it.
Right.
But include movements. Include a squat. Include a lunge. Include a push, pull, twist, bend, gait into your daily movement program.
Right.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
So movement is a lot better than just using a very specific muscles. Think about it. Use it for your advantage. You have anything else?
That will be it.
Thank you very much, guys, and until next time.
Take care.